At 11:47 p.m., a woman walks out of her workplace and disappears without a sound. No scream, no struggle, just a silent CCTV camera watching as Sophia steps into the dark and never comes back. Who was she meeting that night? And why did she follow instead of running? As investigators rewind the footage frame by frame, they uncover a truth far more terrifying than a random crime. Because this wasn't a moment of fear. It was a moment of choice. And hidden inside that final frame lies a secret someone was willing to kill to erase. Welcome to Night Crime Stories Hub. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe. The industrial town always fell quiet after dark, as if the streets themselves learned when to stop speaking. By 11 p.m., the warehouses stood like hollow shells, lit by flickering security lights and the distant hum of generators. Behind one logistics company, a single CCTV camera stared down a narrow service road, its red indicator blinking steadily, recording without judgment, without sound. The footage begins unremarkably. A steel door swings open and Sophia steps into frame. She wears her work jacket loosely, keys clenched in one hand, her shoulders slumped with the exhaustion of another late shift. She pauses, glancing back toward the building, as if listening for something that never comes. The camera cannot hear her breath, cannot capture the unease settling across her face. Sophia walks slowly toward the parking area, heels clicking softly against the concrete. Sounds the footage will never remember. She checks her phone, the screen lighting up her features for a brief second. Investigators would later zoom in on that moment, wondering who she was expecting to hear from, and why no reply ever came. The service road remains empty. No cars pass. No doors open. The town sleeps on, unaware that it is about to inherit a crime that will define it. For nearly 2 minutes, nothing happens. Sophia stops again, this time closer to the edge of the frame. Her body language changes, subtle but undeniable. Her shoulders tense. She turns her head, not toward the road ahead, but back toward the shadows behind the building. This is where detectives would say the story truly begins. Later analysis would reveal faint details most viewers missed at first glance. A ripple of movement in the shadows, a hesitation in Sophia's final step, a choice made in silence. Frame by frame, experts would argue over pixels and probabilities, unaware that the answers were already slipping past the lens, unseen and unstoppable. In those missing seconds alone, at exactly 11:47 p.m., the timestamp in the corner of the footage flickers. For a fraction of a second, the image distorts, the digital clock freezing as if time itself hesitates. When the picture stabilizes, the service road looks the same, empty, silent, unchanged. Sophia is no longer there. No struggle is visible. No scream is heard. One moment she exists inside the frame, the next she does not. And somewhere beyond the camera's unblinking eye, something irreversible has just occurred. By morning, the frozen CCTV frame was already circulating among investigators, but it revealed nothing about who Sophia had been before she vanished. To understand the silence she left behind, police began where the footage could not, her life. Sophia lived alone in a small rented house on the edge of town, close enough to the factories that the air smelled faintly of oil at night. Neighbors described her as polite, forgettable, the kind of woman who waved but never lingered. She worked long hours at the logistics company, rarely missed a shift, and never caused trouble. On paper, she was invisible. Inside the company, Sophia was trusted. She handled sensitive files, late-night reports, and access codes that few others were allowed to touch. Co-workers remembered her as calm and professional, though distant, as if she kept an invisible wall between herself and everyone else. She did not join after-work dinners. She did not share stories about her past. She smiled, then returned to work. That distance, investigators would learn, had been growing. Phone records showed unanswered calls stacked late into the night. Messages read but never replied to. Her recent promotion came with a pay raise, and with it, quiet resentment from colleagues who felt overlooked. One coworker admitted Sophia had started looking over her shoulder, lowering her voice when speaking, ending conversations abruptly. At home, detectives found no signs of chaos, no forced entry, no broken glass, just neatly arranged furniture and a calendar with dates circled but unlabeled. In her drawer lay stress medication prescribed only weeks earlier. There was no criminal record, no history of violence, nothing that explained why she would simply disappear. Yet beneath the routine, pressure was building. Bank statements showed unusual cash withdrawals. Security logs placed her in the building long after her shifts officially ended. Someone somewhere was demanding her time and attention. As officers mapped her final weeks, a troubling pattern emerged. Sophia had not been going straight home after work. Multiple nights ended elsewhere, unaccounted for. When confronted with the data, one detective said the same quiet sentence aloud. Sophia had been meeting someone in secret for weeks, and that discovery would soon pull investigators toward the shadows waiting just beyond the reach of the silent camera, watching everything unfold without mercy. With the discovery of Sophia's secret meetings, investigators rewound time, reconstructing her final day hour by hour. The morning began normally. Swipe card logs showed her entering the logistics company at 8:12 a.m., coffee in hand, routine intact. CCTV from the lobby captured her nodding to the receptionist, expression neutral, controlled. Throughout the afternoon, text messages painted a quieter tension. Sophia sent short replies, avoided questions, promised explanations later. One unsent draft, recovered from her phone, read simply, "I can't keep doing this." Analysts would later describe that sentence as a warning disguised as resignation. Her final shift stretched late into the evening. Access records confirmed she stayed well past closing, moving between departments she no longer officially worked in. On camera, her movements slowed. She checked the hallway more than once, pausing near doors she usually passed without thought. Investigators noted the change immediately. This was not fatigue. This was anticipation. At 11:32 p.m., Sophia recorded a voice note. Her voice was low, measured, but strained. "I just need this to be over," she said, followed by a long silence. "I'll explain everything soon. Please trust me." The message was never sent, but its timestamp placed it minutes before the CCTV footage behind the building began. The camera showed her exiting the service door at 11:44 p.m. She stopped under the security light, phone still in her hand. For several seconds, she didn't move. Her body angled toward the parking lot, but her eyes kept drifting back to the building. Frame by frame, investigators watched her hesitate, as if weighing two terrible options. She took 3 steps forward, then stopped again. This was the moment experts fixated on, the pause that suggested choice, not coincidence. Something unseen had altered her plan. Perhaps a message, perhaps a promise, perhaps a threat she believed she could manage. As the footage continued, the service road remained empty, silent, unchanged. Then, on the far left edge of the frame, movement flickered where no movement should have been. A shape stretched across the concrete, thin and distorted by the light. A second shadow entered the frame. It lingered there, unmoving, long enough to suggest intention rather than accident. Analysts debated whether it belonged to a person, a vehicle, or something closer, waiting just beyond the lens. Whatever cast it did not rush. It waited. And in that waiting, investigators understood that Sophia had not been alone, even before she stepped out of sight. The footage offered no mercy, only questions that would soon demand answers afterward. The second shadow changed everything. Once investigators acknowledged its presence, the case spilled beyond the logistics company and into the town itself. News traveled fast. By the second evening, everyone had a theory, and everyone believed they had seen something that night. Police began knocking on doors. Sophia's neighbors recalled small details they once ignored. Her lights turning on late, her car leaving and returning, footsteps on the gravel after midnight. None of it seemed criminal alone, but together it formed a pattern of quiet disruption. Someone had been part of her nights. Inside the company, interviews grew tense. Co-workers spoke carefully, choosing words as if afraid of consequences. One admitted Sophia had recently argued with someone behind closed doors. Another remembered seeing her cry in the restroom, then wash her face and return to work as if nothing happened. Trust thinned with every statement. Security staff were questioned next. Parking records showed Sophia's car in unfamiliar locations after work, sometimes remaining parked for hours. Receipts recovered from her bag pointed to cafes and roadside stops she never mentioned to anyone. Deleted messages, partially restored, revealed conversations filled with pressure, guilt, and emotional leverage rather than affection. Investigators noticed patterns in timing. The meetings followed stressful workdays, moments after confrontations, or just before deadlines. Sophia's behavior shifted accordingly, becoming quieter, more withdrawn. She was reacting, adjusting, surviving. That realization reframed her disappearance not as chance, but as escalation. Investigators began to suspect manipulation. Sophia was not reckless. She was responding to something. Someone had positioned themselves as essential, then threatening. A classic imbalance of power, hidden behind routine. As interviews continued, contradictions surfaced. A guard denied seeing Sophia leave on certain nights, yet access logs said otherwise. A colleague insisted they barely spoke, while phone records showed frequent calls. Each lie, small on its own, added weight to a growing truth. Someone close was protecting themselves. The town, once quiet, became restless. Rumors spread faster than facts. Eyes turned suspicious. Familiar faces now carried doubt. Detectives reminded themselves that silence could be intentional, and fear often looked like cooperation. Late one night, a digital forensic analyst flagged a breakthrough. Buried deep in Sophia's phone data was a recovered message fragment, nearly erased. It wasn't long, but it changed the tone of the entire investigation. The room fell silent as investigators understood the message was not a plea, but leverage, carefully designed to control her choices and future actions. For words stared back from the screen, cold and deliberate. If I refuse, tell them. For words reframed the hunt. Investigators returned to the footage, enhancing contrast and sharpening edges until the grain seemed to breathe. At the far edge of the frame, a man emerged only in suggestion. A shoulder, a stride, a silhouette that refused clarity. He never faced the camera, never crossed the light. He walked as if he knew exactly where to stand to remain unseen. Analysts argued over posture and gait, measuring steps against concrete seams. One profile suggested a coworker known for sudden anger. Another hinted at a supervisor with access and motive. Red herrings multiplied. Interviews grew sharper. Voices rose, chairs scraped, alibis cracked and reformed. The pressure was deliberate, psychological, designed to expose a tremor of guilt. The colleague with the temper clenched his jaw and denied everything, insisting he left early. His timeline nearly fit. The manager spoke calmly, almost too calmly, offering emails and schedules that looked prepared. Detectives noted the care, the polish, the practiced patience. Silence filled the room between questions, heavy and accusing. Meanwhile, technicians synchronized cameras across the property. Seconds were aligned, shadows tracked, reflections compared. The man's path threaded through blind spots with intent. He paused where Sophia paused, waited where she waited. The footage said nothing, yet everything seemed to speak at once. Interrogations stretched into night. Sleep-deprived officers replayed the same seconds until meaning felt elastic. Each suspect carried a version of the truth, and none matched perfectly. Doubt infected every assumption. If the man existed, he knew the system. If he knew the system, he belonged. Then a technician slowed the clip to single frames. They watched Sophia's feet. They watched her shoulders. They watched the space between her and the shadow. There was no recoil, no flinch, no attempt to flee. Instead, there was alignment. Context sharpened. The shadow matched schedules, access windows, and habits learned over time. This was not chance. It was choreography. Officers felt the room tilt as implications settled. If he guided her steps, he held leverage. If she complied, fear had already done its work. The case pivoted from pursuit to relationship, from stranger to someone known. Names resurfaced, motives narrowed, and the footage, still mute, pressed closer, demanding they admit what the evidence was becoming. It narrowed timelines, tightened throats, and warned investigators that denial would soon be impossible for anyone involved in her final minutes that night alone outside thereafter quietly. Sophia adjusted her pace to his. She turned when he turned. She stepped forward, not back. Frame by frame, the conclusion settled with chilling certainty. Whatever waited beyond the light was not a surprise. It was an invitation she recognized. Sophia didn't try to run. She followed him. Following the realization that Sophia had followed him, investigators shifted focus from pursuit to pattern. The question was no longer who grabbed her, but who had already shaped her choices. Financial analysts were brought in, and the paper trail began to speak. Bank records showed small, regular transfers leaving Sophia's account, never enough to trigger alarms, always timed after late shifts. Call logs revealed repeated contact with one number saved under a false name. The calls were brief, often unanswered, but persistent. Control did not need conversation. Presence was enough. Company access data filled the gaps. Someone with higher clearance had overridden systems, creating private windows where Sophia could be summoned without witnesses. The imbalance was unmistakable. This was not a romance hidden out of shame, but a relationship maintained through pressure and quiet threat. In Sophia's home, detectives found what she never shared. A thin journal lay tucked behind old manuals, its pages filled with careful handwriting. She wrote about fear disguised as obligation, about owing someone who kept changing the price. Guilt bled through every entry, not for what she had done, but for what she believed she caused. One entry stood out. Sophia described collecting proof, copying files, saving messages. "If I wait," she wrote, "I can end this." Her plan was not escape, but exposure. She believed truth could protect her, that daylight would dissolve the hold over her life. Her silence now felt deliberate. Each step that night, each pause on camera carried intention. She was buying time, not giving in. Investigators understood then that Sophia had been managing danger alone, convinced she could control the ending. The final pages of the journal were missing. The binding was torn, the paper ripped cleanly, not by accident, but by urgency. Forensic timing placed the damage within hours of her disappearance. Whatever she had written last was taken or destroyed on the same night the camera lost her. The discovery shifted the case again. Someone knew about the journal. Someone feared what it contained. And as detectives closed the notebook, one certainty hardened. The truth Sophia planned to reveal was still out there, just hidden in the hands of someone willing to kill to keep it buried. That realization narrowed their search and widened the danger. The hidden relationship was no longer abstract, but active, watching, listening. Whoever removed those pages knew time was short, and if Sophia had planned to expose them, they might strike again before the truth surfaced. Police felt the pressure mounting fast. The case broke open the moment a name reached the media. Police had not confirmed it publicly, but leaks spread faster than caution. Within hours, reporters crowded the town's only main street, cameras pointed at a single front door. The investigation, once careful and controlled, was suddenly on display. The suspect denied everything. "I didn't touch her," he said, voice tight, hands shaking. "You're destroying my life." Detectives pressed harder, replaying timelines, repeating questions until answers shifted. One statement contradicted another. Silence followed denial. Denial followed anger. Lies stacked neatly, one on top of the next. The town reacted immediately. Friends stopped answering calls. Neighbors watched from behind curtains. Accusations replaced sympathy. Someone spray-painted a word across a fence near the suspect's home, and by morning, it had already been scrubbed away. Fear was contagious, and it moved quickly. Inside the station, interrogations grew sharper. "You said you left at 11, an officer said. "The footage says otherwise." The suspect looked away. "I don't remember," he replied. "It was a long night." That answer appeared again and again, offered by more than one person. Alibis collapsed under scrutiny. Timestamps didn't align. Receipts were misplaced. Calls were deleted but partially recovered. Each confrontation exposed another fracture, another moment where the story bent instead of holding firm. Yet none of it explained the missing minutes when Sophia vanished. Detectives returned to the timeline, uneasy. If the suspect was lying, it was clumsy. If he was innocent, someone else had guided events with precision. The pressure to close the case mounted with every headline, but certainty refused to arrive. One investigator pointed to the board. "This gap," she said quietly. "We keep skipping it." The room fell silent. Everyone saw it now. A window of time untouched by interviews, unexplained by evidence. That night, a technician reviewing archived files noticed an unlabeled camera feed stored separately from the main system. It wasn't part of the original sweep. It hadn't failed. It had simply never been checked. The angle was different, higher, wider, and it showed the service road from a place no one had thought to look before. The newly discovered camera rewrote the case in minutes. Positioned high above the service road, its angle was wide and unforgiving. It didn't capture faces clearly, but it captured something more damning: behavior. Investigators watched in silence as the footage rolled, the room heavy with anticipation. Sophia entered the frame exactly as before, her movements cautious, deliberate. Then the man appeared, no longer just a shadow. He approached at an angle that suggested familiarity, not pursuit. There was no grab, no sudden shift in momentum. Instead, there was recognition. Sophia adjusted her stance toward him, closing the distance herself. Detectives replayed the moment again and again. Her shoulders did not rise in panic. Her hands did not clench. She spoke first. Though the audio was absent, her mouth moved with practiced restraint, as if choosing words carefully. This was not a confrontation. It was a conversation already rehearsed. The man responded calmly. His posture was relaxed, confident. He stood where the light favored him least, but his body language spoke loudly. This was someone who expected compliance. Someone used to being obeyed. The implication settled heavily over the room. The crime was no longer framed as a sudden act of violence. It was preparation meeting opportunity. Emotional manipulation had done the work long before that night. Whatever happened next was merely the final step in a process already underway. The obvious suspect faded under scrutiny. His movements didn't match. His timing was off. The footage pointed elsewhere, toward someone with patience, access, and motive rooted in control rather than rage. Betrayal replaced impulse as the central truth. Then came the detail no one expected. As the footage continued, the man reached upward, briefly stepping out of Sophia's line of sight. Investigators froze the frame. His hand brushed the camera housing, precise and intentional. He wasn't trying to disable it. He was adjusting it. The motion was subtle, practiced, ensuring the most damning angle stayed just out of view. Only someone who knew the system would dare touch it without fear. Only someone confident the camera belonged to him in some way. The room went quiet as the implication landed. The camera hadn't merely witnessed the crime. It had been managed. And in that single movement, investigators understood why the footage looked the way it did, and how much more had been hidden just beyond the frame. The adjusted camera forced investigators to confront how much of the case had been built on convenience instead of truth. Narration peeled back each assumption, one by one, revealing how easily the investigation had been guided. The angry coworker, the careless timeline, the obvious suspect. Every red herring now appeared deliberate, carefully placed to absorb attention while something darker moved unnoticed. As evidence was re-examined, a familiar voice surfaced repeatedly. Calm, reassuring, trusted. Someone Sophia had leaned on during moments of pressure. Recorded calls revealed subtle control masked as concern. "You're overthinking," the voice said gently. "Let me handle it." The words were steady, confident, practiced. Listening again, detectives heard not comfort, but conditioning. That voice belonged to someone who understood procedure, someone who anticipated questions before they were asked. Rehearsed statements surfaced during interviews, mirroring language used in private calls with Sophia. The alignment was too precise to ignore. This was orchestration, not coincidence. Psychological analysis shifted toward the killer's deterioration. In later recordings, patience thinned. The voice grew sharper, urgency replacing reassurance. Control was slipping. Sophia's plan to expose the truth had accelerated the pressure. The manipulator was becoming reckless, correcting mistakes, adjusting narratives, touching cameras. Investigators realized the case had been steered from the beginning. Evidence hadn't been hidden randomly. It had been curated. Suspicion had been encouraged in safe directions. The town's outrage had been useful noise. And through it all, one trusted presence remained untouched. Then came the most unsettling realization. Reviewing Sophia's journal references alongside digital timestamps, detectives noticed preparation. Files duplicated. Messages scheduled. Passwords shared with a delayed trigger. Sophia hadn't just been collecting evidence. She had been planning for absence. A final recovered voice note, recorded days before her death, confirmed it. "If something happens," she said quietly, "it means I was right." There was no panic in her tone, only resolve. The room fell silent as the implications settled. Sophia hadn't believed survival was guaranteed. She had calculated risk, weighed consequences, and moved forward anyway. Her pauses on camera, her compliance, her calm, they weren't surrender. They were strategy. She had known exposure might cost her life, and she had prepared for that outcome, trusting the truth to surface even if she could not. The arrest came before dawn, quiet but decisive. When officers led him from his home, the town watched through glowing screens and cracked curtains. Shock rippled outward, followed by denial, then anger. This was not the monster people had imagined. This was someone familiar, respected, embedded in daily routine. Justice, it seemed, had chosen an uncomfortable face. Inside the courtroom, silence returned, heavier than before. Prosecutors let the evidence speak slowly. Swipe logs, call records, financial trails. Then the CCTV footage played, enlarged and stabilized, each second stretched thin. Jurors leaned forward as Sophia paused beneath the light, as the man stepped carefully through shadow. The room felt her hesitation, his confidence. The camera, once mute, now testified without mercy. Dialogue cut through the air. "You knew she would follow," the prosecutor said, "because you trained her to." The defense objected, but the words lingered. Recordings played next. His voice, calm and guiding. "Trust me," he told her. "I'll fix it." The jury heard what investigators had finally understood. Reassurance as restraint. Witnesses described power quietly abused. Access granted, favors implied, threats never spoken aloud. Choices narrowed until compliance felt safer than resistance. Sophia's journal excerpts were read carefully, her fear balanced with resolve. She had believed exposure could end it. She had been wrong about the cost. When the verdict came, the town exhaled, but relief did not follow. Guilty carried weight, not comfort. Families avoided each other's eyes. The logistics company issued statements. Apologies sounded rehearsed. No sentence could return what had been taken or explain why warnings were missed. Outside, rain fell steadily, washing chalk from sidewalks and rumors from walls. Investigators stood together, aware that justice had arrived late and incomplete. Sophia's absence remained louder than the verdict. Before sentencing, the prosecutor asked the judge for permission to submit one final exhibit. It had been withheld until now, deemed too sensitive for public release. The courtroom stilled as a sealed envelope was opened. Inside was a file Sophia had scheduled to send automatically if she failed to check in. It contained names, dates, and proof extending beyond a single crime. The implications reached further than anyone expected, touching systems designed to protect. As the judge reviewed the document, the prosecutor spoke softly. "This," she said, "is what she wanted the world to see last." And with that revelation, it became clear that the trial had not ended the story. It had only exposed how much more remained hidden, waiting to surface next. The final exhibit forced investigators, jurors, and the town to look again at a moment they thought they understood. Prosecutors replayed the CCTV one last time, slowing it to the smallest measurable unit. There, in the corner of the frame, was the overlooked detail. Sophia's hand, briefly visible, slipping something into the metal seam beneath the camera housing. It wasn't panic. It was placement. Digital forensics confirmed it minutes later. The object was a slim data drive, magnetized, hidden in plain sight. Sophia had used the only place she knew would survive scrutiny, the thing her manipulator trusted most. The camera. In that instant, her last act became clear. She wasn't begging for mercy. She was preserving truth. The narrative collapsed inward. The murder wasn't just cold-blooded. It was corrective, designed to erase a voice before it spoke. The careful grooming, the rehearsed reassurances, the managed footage. All of it pointed to one goal: silence without spectacle. Kill the witness, control the story, move on. But Sophia had anticipated that ending. The drive contained copies of files she'd referenced in her journal, corroborated by timestamps and access logs. It showed a pattern larger than one victim, one night, one town. Oversight failures. Quiet complicity. Doors held open by people who benefited from not asking questions. After the verdict, consequences arrived unevenly. Internal reviews began. Contracts were suspended. Names disappeared from letterheads. Some apologized publicly. Others resigned quietly. The town learned that justice does not land all at once. It leaks. Years later, the logistics company would install new cameras and call it reform. Memorials would be brief. Conversations would trail off. Yet the frame remained, archived and unchanged. Sophia beneath the light. The man in shadow. The pause that meant choice. Documentarians end where the truth began, on the frozen image at 11:47 p.m. They ask viewers to study the empty road, the missing seconds, the ordinary systems that made extraordinary harm possible. Silence, the film suggests, is rarely accidental. It is maintained by routines, rewards, and fear of disruption. Sophia disrupted everything with a single motion, trusting that someone, somewhere, would notice what power tried hardest to hide forever. And in noticing, choose courage over comfort, truth over complicity. The question lingers, unresolved and necessary. If one woman could hide the truth in plain sight, how many others saw it and chose not to look? If this case kept you captivated, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We upload new crime case videos daily. Until then, stay alert, stay aware.